It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy. Back to Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the commander in front of us on a budget on my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's APB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. That deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. So I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out those links in the description below. I'd really appreciate it. But today, we're covering some more Spider-Man commanders leading up to a few weeks of other content. And today we're talking about Doctor Octopus Master Planner. A 7-mana Damir human scientist villain. It's going to buff all of our other villains. Gives us a maximum hand size of 8. In the beginning of our end step, if we have fewer than 8 cards in our hand, we draw cards equal to the difference. This is a really fun ability, and I think it's really useful because it's pretty easy in Commander, right? Once you get into your later turns to drain your hand out, only have 1 or 2 cards. This is going to allow us to draw a ton of cards. And that way we can hopefully just pay off the fact that we're drawing a ton of cards. I want to say off the rip that there aren't a ton of villains in Magic. And I think this is the one way that I think this commander specifically can get a little bit better. So my hope is maybe something like the Marvel superhero set next year adds us some more villains that fit in this color combination that we can, then bolster the deck with. But if there's any downside, I think, to this one, it's just the amount of villains, that isn't equally or efficiently substituted by changelings. But I want to give a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for watching the channel and supporting it. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos a little bit early for just $1 a month, consider checking that out down below. What villains do we have? Well, we get to use these creatures that kind of exist in this tribal support range to help us out. Things like Adaptive Automaton and Bloodline Pretender both come in, you choose a type, and they become a creature that type. Automaton buffs all of our other villains. Bloodline Pretender just gets a counter every time another villain comes in. So, pretty useful to kind of bolster some of these other villains. I think Black Cat's kind of interesting. When she comes in, you look at the top 9 of an opponent's library, you exile 2 of them face down. We could play them for as long as they remain exiled and mana of any type to cast them. Really interesting, right? Black has a lot of these very interesting theft effects, and I think that's very useful for us if we can pick the right opponent at the table. Chameleon's really interesting because it comes in as a copy of any creature we control, except its name is Chameleon, Master of Disguise. So this is really nice because it can come in as a copy of Doc or some of the other legends in our deck and still be named Chameleon. You can basically have 2 copies of them, which I think is really good, and it can be really helpful, especially if you think about it, because that's a +4/+4 buff to all of our other villains, right? We're playing the Scene Box Doc Ock, 7-mana, 8/8. Turns a non-creature artifact you control into an 8/8 villain, in addition to its other types. We covered Doc Ock on the channel last week, so if you're interested in seeing that one specifically, that one's already out. Flying Octobot, whenever another villain comes in, you put a counter on it once per turn. I like this ability, especially become a potentially nice flying threat in the air. Metallic Mimic, another one of these tribal support cards. Every other villain is going to come in with a counter on it. Morbius, Flying Vigilance Lifelink, and then you can exile it from your graveyard for an effect. Moreland comes in with a number of counters on it, equal to the X you choose, and then he deals X damage to target opponent. It has lifelink, so you can gain that life back. And hey, lifelink is going to be useful, especially as Moreland gets bigger and bigger. Mysterio is kind of interesting. Comes in and makes a 3/3 blue villain creature token for each non-token villain we control. But the tokens go away when Mysterio leaves the battlefield. I think the other thing that we could probably do, that I tried to put a little bit of support in the deck for, but I think we could probably flush it out in testing, is blink/copy effects. Not on Mysterio specifically, right? Because the tokens leave when Mysterio leaves the battlefield, but it could be useful on some of the other villains that have Enter's abilities, right? To kind of get them multiple times. Prowler says whenever another villain comes in, it connives. You're going to draw and then pitch, and if you pitch a non-land card, you get to put a counter on it. Tombstone lets us bring a villain from our graveyard back to our hand and then reduces the cost of all of our villains. Venom, Eddie Brock, whenever another creature dies, you put a counter on Venom, and if the creature was a villain, then you draw a card. Vulture gives all of their villains we control flying until end of turn whenever Vulture attacks, which is a huge ability. It is 6 mana, but it's pretty useful, right? And then we have, support that cares just about types. Raise the Palisade, pick a type, return every creatures that aren't that type back to their owner's hands. Black and Market Connections can make that 3/2 shapeshifter, so that'll have Changeling, meaning it's every creature type, so those would be villains. And then, Kindred Discovery can draw, right, as villains either come in or attack. The kind of the point there is there are only so many villains in the deck, so we can use Changelings and some of these things that make Changeling tokens, right, to basically just have access to more villains. And then, just as equally, I think we can care about drawing cards, because there's probably a chance that Doc Ock, the first time it comes down, probably draws us, I would guess, 4 or 5 cards. And then over the course of the game, right, we hope that we can draw more. Things like Teferi's Temporal Pilgrim get a loyalty count every time you draw a card, and can make these 2/2 spirits that grow by counters every time you draw a card. Psychosis Crawler, dealing out damage to your opponents every time we draw a card, and grows for the number of cards in our hand. Neither of them are villains, but again, they care about the card draw. Psychic Frog might look odd, but I think it's one of those cards that could be really beneficial. So you can pitch a card at any time to put a counter on Psychic Frog. And my thought here is that you could purposefully help pitch your hand down, right, so that you can draw more cards off of Doc Ock at our end step. I'm going to seize, whenever you draw a card, you put a counter on it, you can move 8 counters from it to make a big 8/8 Kraken. Wizard's class would give us no maximum hand size, but the key ability we really care about is the bottom one, putting counters on creatures whenever we draw a card. And then, we could pair the idea of that with something like Psychic Corrosion. Whenever we draw a card, each opponent mills the top 2, right? And we could really just care about paying off drawing. I think this is another example of a way we could really make the deck better, flesh it out more. And I think it comes down to testing to see, how well Villain Tribal works for us. And if we're not seeing as much of it, or you're not seeing it really benefit you as much, I think maybe it's one of those things where we think about cutting down a few and maybe the uncommon villains and trying to pay off drawing more, pay off pitching cards so we can draw more. I think that's the exact thing I would think about going into testing. Now, I show you that there are other, shapeshifters, these changelings that you can use. Phyrexian Metamorph can come in, and there's creatures that come in and copy. Those are options if you want to lean more into the villains, just trying to get more villains. I think I'm inclined, before we do the testing, I'd be inclined to probably pay off drawing a little bit more, because I feel like there's a world where if we find ways to pitch cards and draw, there's so many things in this game that care about drawing cards. But I think it just comes down to trying to find the ratios you like, right, between how much villain support you want and how much, draw support you want. And then I think the deck in Dimir has a decent amount of removal, but you could consider more things like Villainous Wrath, of course, has Doc on it. Very thematic, right? But of course, we could consider more of it in that sense. But let's do what we love to do most on the channel and get into our playtests. Remember, the goal of playtests on our channel is not to find Magical Christmas Land. It's not just to show off all our best plays, but it's to get in some gameplay scenarios and kind of understand what hands we're looking to keep and how we're going to make them happen. So here, you're looking at a 3-lander with Arcane Signet. So that presents 4 mana, right? Doc is 7, so we need to get our way up there. But we see some removal. We see the Crawler, so I don't mind it. Again, we're statistically likely to start, finding our way up the ladder on mana. So there we go. Our threshold's at 3. We could get something like Bloodline Pretender now. There's Feed the Swarm again for some great removal. 4 and 5, so I don't even mind something like Psychosis Crawler here. It's not a villain, unfortunately, which is probably what we're going to choose for the Pretender, so it's not going to give the Pretender a counter. But I think here we probably just crack the Fabled Passage. Just again, keep getting some pieces down. Again, we're 1 mana away from Doc. So Doc's most likely going to have a next turn. We would have dealt out some damage right when we drew for turn. And then, we have removal to go through. We have removal. We have counterplay. So it's not like we're sitting here doing nothing, right? We have great ways to interact with the board. And then there's your 7th mana for Doc if you want to do that right away. The nice thing about that is this gives Pretender a counter. This is a 5/5. Psychosis Crawler is a 4/4. But the really nice part is going to end step, we're going to immediately draw 4. There's 4 more damage to from the Crawler, right? Now the Crawler can really start taking over the game. Right, dosing out damage. We've got lots of removal in our hand. You could look at now something like Kindred Discovery not being a bad play, because as these, villains attack, they're going to be drawing you more cards, right? Teferi could make sense, coming in, making that Spirit this turn, and really just taking advantage of that. I mean, ideally, we want to play the most things possible so that we draw the most cards, right? And get the most value, right, off of Psychosis Crawler in that sense. So I'm kind of almost thinking something like Kindred Discovery, calling Villain. And then I've got 3 mana left. You could deluge some of the smaller creatures if you want. I mean, Psychosis Crawler is a 6/6. This is a 3/3. This is a 4/8. So maybe there's a world where we deluge for 3 or 4 to wipe out some of the smaller creatures, keep these alive. Maybe you rid the Pretender for it, or 1 or 2. Or you could just dole out some removal. Feed the Swarm. I do think I'd still want to try to use another card. The only downside to how big our hand right now is that with the draw from the Kindred Discovery, we're going to end up not drawing off of Doc Ock. But again, we're trying to set our board up, right, turn over turn. So, even we do something like that, these guys, let's say we do it low enough, these guys both attack, there's 2 more damage. And then going to our end step, we have 8, so we're not going to draw there. But then coming to our next turn, right, now you have something like Vulture, you have something like Changeling Outcast, which is a villain, so these are drawing us cards, dealing out damage. And I kind of like this position a little bit better because we're starting to see more of these playables we could play. Our hand was a little bit removal heavy, which is not a bad thing at all, especially in our modern Commander format where so many things just become threats really quickly. Let's get into playtest number 2 here. Keeping a 4-lander with Patchwork Banner, so there's your 5th mana, and you're going to choose a villain, right? We see a villain in Lady Octopus. Whenever you draw your first or second card each turn, put an Ingenuity counter on her. That says you can cast an artifact from your hand with mana value less than or equal to the number of counters on her without paying its mana cost. So they're going to help us get in these artifacts for cheap. I think it's Porter Carfell turn 1. We could go Dark Ritual into the Patchwork Banner, but I'd kind of rather wait for the Dark Ritual to help me get down. I think it makes more sense actually for us to do that last turn. But again, I think it makes more sense to have us use the Dark Ritual to help get down Doc Ock as opposed to just using it to get something like Patchwork Banner down. Even though the banner's great. And then the next turn, now we're at 5 mana. This would be the turn to go something like Dark Ritual, right, to get down Doc Ock. And then we're going to draw up to 8. There's Decanter, which can get us a maximum hand size increase, but also it's just a mana rock. Like, that's the kind of nice thing about getting these mana rocks down, right, is that we could tap Lady Octopus to put the Decanter down for free, right? So then we're at 7? You could go Propaganda, you could go Swarm of Bees, a nice flying threat. You could go Morbius, again, a nice flying threat. And then draw up to 8. And again, the whole point here is now as we're drawing up to 8, we're refilling. Chameleon becomes a copy of Doc Ock. Unfortunately, they're all legends. There's no key target to go for a Rite of Replication on. But, I mean, we're building our board. We have some counterplay. Right? We can hold up removal and counterplay if we want to. And just make some big effects. Right now, they're all +4/+4. Each of these Doc Ocks will get the +2/+2 from the other one, right? And we can just keep attacking. We're going to keep drawing up. And the hope is you're playing some of that Dimir control game where you can keep the removal up for your opponent's things while trying to continue to increase the presence, right, of the number of villains you have on the board. Here we've got a 2-lander. We see the Temp, the Talisman, and the Thought Vessel. And then we see the Lady Octopus again. We see Victimize, a good way to get creatures back in case they get destroyed. I think Talisman into Wizards class seems good to me. Thought Vessel and then Lady Octopus, right? Now we're really working our way up. 4, 5, 6. We're just 1 mana off of, both Doc Ocks. So you could do something like Vulture this turn, right? Again, miss the mana again, but that's okay. So you have 2 options here. We can either tick up Wizards class to draw, or we can just play around it. I think I like the idea of ticking up Wizards class to draw. I think the land drop's really important. We don't really want to miss it. So now we've got 4 mana left. We can just hold up and keep the party going forward. Now 6, 7, 8. We could use the Dark Ritual to get to 10, but obviously Doc Ock's 7. We actually have the option of both Doc Ocks, right? My only thought about putting this one down as first is that it gets us more card draw this turn. And then next turn, right, this Doc Ock can start turning our artifacts into creatures. They turn them into villains, right? And I think we're kind of seeing that there. The nice thing about this turn is we can get that Soul Ring done, giving access to 4 mana. And then if somebody removes something, as long as they don't exile it, then we've got that Victimize sitting around, right, to hopefully get our villains back. And, we could go off to the Black Cat, try to get something from somebody. But otherwise, like, if we can let these 2 Doc Ocks sit around, you're turning these into big creatures, and then maybe you take up the Wizards class to start putting counters, right, when you're drawing these cards. If you think about it, next turn, this turn you can get out 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4, maybe even 5 cards out of your hand, right? And then tick it up so that we're drawing a bunch on the end step. And again, I think we're putting good value down. Some of these playtests are just going to come down to what do your opponents have. If I have an opponent that I think's probably got a lot of good stuff in their deck, maybe it's worth Black Catting earlier to like try to see, right, what you could dig for. But I think so much of your playtests come down to like holding up the mana for removal, and are you going to use it or aren't you, in finding your targets, right? That's the kind of stuff that's, to me, kind of hard to simulate, but it's important to keep in the back of your mind. Playtest 4 here with a 3-lander. There's the Talisman. We've got a pair of Chameleons. We've got Clever Personator, right, as Chameleon, and then Chasm Skulker. Chasm Skulker is a great one to copy. It grows whenever you draw a card, and then when it dies, you get a bunch of squid tokens equal to the counters on it. So it's one of those ones that you don't mind dying if it has to, because you're just going to get a bunch of value from it. So my thought is here, get the Skulker down, because then you start getting the counters on it, right? 5 mana here. Probably just Clever the Skulker. And again, we're working our way up to Doc. The only downside, I think, to Chameleon here is that its name is Chameleon, but its type isn't villain. So I'd almost have to like Metallic Mimic and then make Chameleon a copy of Metallic Mimic. You know what I mean? That's my thought, just to keep it a villain. It would come in with a counter on it, but then this next turn, Doc's coming in with 2 counters, right? Because of the 2 Metallic Mimics. And then now it's kind of fun because you have some nice threats out, right? Potentially a way to refill your board if somebody tries to wipe it, right? Because you're getting the squid still. Otherwise, these guys are still villains. They're getting that buff. And then immediately this turn, we're refilling our hand and we're already back to go. I think that's the thing I really like about this Doc Ock, is that you're filling your hands. You're getting more stuff ready to cast. You're really trying to churn through your deck. And I kind of like it because you're kind of already up at 6 or 7 mana anyway to try to cast Doc Ock in the first place, which means you're going to hopefully have the mana. I mean, look at this next turn. I'm playing a land, and I have 8 mana, there's 3, 5 mana left. You could go here, you could go with a Black Cat. So you're getting, 2 or 3 cards, 3 or 4 cards out of your hand, and then you're constantly drawing more, growing these Skulkers. And so I think you can kind of see that, trying to do that merriment between the villains and the card draw, just trying your best to fit these two together. And I think over time, whether we get more, when we get more villains in Marvel superheroes, or, maybe you decide to try to let the villains go more and try to go towards card draw. I think there's just a lot of ways we can take advantage of this. I tried to spin my way towards the villains, but I'd love to know what you think, and I will catch you on the next one.